Electricity
This
Human Resources
conference
Canada.
will now be recorded.
I'd like to begin by saying just a couple of sort of housekeeping things. The webinar is, of course, going to be recorded today. So anything that we have will be shared after the fact with those participants that are on the call. We have turned off everyone's cameras just to help keep the bandwidth at a minimum so that you'll just unfortunately be seeing my lovely face and my basement office as we're all working from home these days. And everyone will be muted for the duration of the discussion. So if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box available to you, and we will answer them sequentially at the end of the discussion today. I'm going to take the first 15 minutes of today's presentation, today's webinar to discuss the program, the Empowering Futures Workplace Program, funded by Employment and Social Development Canada, and I will be answering questions for the next 45 minutes after the fact, or however long the questions and answers come. If everyone can just make sure that you're muted, that would be great. I'd like to start off today by thanking you all again for joining us. And recognizing but I'd also like to start off by saying I'd like to recognize the tough work that continues to be done by Canada's essential service workers in healthcare, of course, but also in supply chain management, including trucking, grocery stores, utility management, and energy delivery, and various other parts of our everyday lives, because without them, our world-class education system and economy would be lost. So my name is Mark Chapeskie. I'm the Director of Programs at Electricity Human Resources Canada. And today, the focus of today's discussion is going to be on the program, the Empowering Futures program, and also the changes that have come about as a result of the COVID-19 crisis that the world is facing today. So without any further ado, forgive me, this is my first time using GoTo for a presentation, so I'm learning as I go here a little bit. So a little bit about the program. Overall, I guess I'll start with who we are as an organization. So Electricity Human Resources Canada is comprised of members. It's a membership-based organization. Our members are made up of industry organizations, so the Ontario Power Generations, BC Hydros, Nalcor Energies, et cetera, but we're also made up of unions in the industry as well. So, the Power Workers Union would be one example. Another might be Society of Professional Engineers, et cetera. And then, of course, we've got post-secondary institutions on our membership and on our board as well. Basically, the sector comprises 107,000 full-time employees who work every day to keep the lights on across the country, from home heating to industrial manufacturing, server farms to that morning cup of coffee for all of us that keeps us going every day. It's the electricity workers that keep the grid online. On the subject of the Empowering Futures program specifically, our objectives are laid out in the 3 points in front of you. So placing students, current students in net new wage subsidized placements nationwide, developing a professional skills training program for students that can be used either by educators or employers, and the development of a career portal to match students to organizations who have openings for student placements. We now have students in almost every province and territory to date. And this fiscal year, so starting April 1st of 2020 and running until March 31st of 2021, it is our objective to place 600 students. We have funding for almost 600 students. Admittedly, some of that has already been claimed for the summer term, but there are 600 students for that full year of funding. So how do we determine eligibility for organization? As we are the electricity sector, our core business is the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity. But we do also support supporting services. So if you think about some renewable energy farms, wind farms, solar, for example, or consulting services that support the electricity sector, or and not-for-profits in the electricity sector. I think Water Power Canada, for example, or Quest Canada, those are some examples. They would all be eligible for funding. Again, assuming that the work is related to the electricity sector in one way or another. It does not mean that it has to be like an electrical engineer or technician technologist. It could also be someone in the arts spaces, for example. And the big change, one of the big changes to the program, and I'll cover each of them individually towards the end of the presentation, but one of the big changes is we are now it's now possible to accept post as the employer of record for the program. They are now eligible, where historically that's been more on a per approval basis and usually tied to some sort of an accelerator or something like that. The one thing to remember, of course, though, is that every position still has to be a net new position. And the description of a net new position is fundamentally in the previous calendar year, is this position above and beyond what would have existed otherwise? So if you had 3 positions last year, we would only be able to fund the 4th or greater this coming year. For larger institutions, we do have clarification from our funder that we are able to look at the total number from a given department rather than a whole organization. So if we think like of large companies with 5,000 or 8,000 or 10,000 employees, it can be very difficult for them to figure out how many students for the company they've had. So we can look for larger institutions at just the given department as opposed to the whole institution. So that's a little bit about net new. Student eligibility. They can be in business or STEAM, and that is not a typo. I know some of us are familiar with this term, but science, technology, engineering, arts, or mathematics. Really, the only program of study that is not eligible for the program is the trades, unfortunately. There are other funding opportunities for individuals that are in the trades, so they are not eligible for the student work placement program, but the business or STEAM students are. Full or part-time studies, so any student registered in either full or part-time would be eligible for the program. Full or part-time employment is also possible as part of the program. And really, we leave that up to the student and the employer of record to determine what works best for them and if they feel like they're able to achieve their learning outcomes as a result of a given placement. They must be a Canadian permanent resident or refugee with status in Canada. And that is not bendable. And of course, they must be legally entitled to work, which would normally align with those residency statuses, of course. To give us some examples of types of students that we've had beyond electrical engineering or in the technicians technologist space, for example, because sometimes I think some organizations feel that that really is what EHRC focuses on. We've had computer programmers in a data company whose primary client is Tesla Motors, for example. We've had software engineers for smart grid startups, business analysts in the electricity utilities. We've had health sciences majors in health and safety roles, and we've had business students in HR roles. Just to give a few examples, that helps us sort of think outside of the box with regard to electricity, because of course those support functions are just as important as the core technical functions are in the industry. So what is the process? And again, this is another area that's changed slightly, but from an overall process perspective, it's largely the same. Employers apply. In this instance, employers can, and we've actually had this in place since close to the beginning of the program, but employers could pre-apply or receive pre-approval for funding. And fundamentally, the reason for that was a lot of co-op offices won't post a job unless they know that the employer has the funding committed in order to secure the placement and post the job on their co-op website. So we've always had a process in place for this. This is one of the changes now, though, that all SWPP partners are implementing, and that is that employers apply. If they don't have a participant selected, we actually have a question built into our form that says, do you have a student selected already? And you get a different set of questions if that's the case. You will have to come back and resubmit that form, but a shortened version of it after the fact, once you do secure a placement. This just allows you to know whether or not you would be eligible and determine that net new criteria, for example, as well as tell us how many placements hypothetically you'd like us to hold for funding for you. That funding then, if it is pre-approved, is on hold for 30 days, renewable. So at the 30-day mark, somebody from our office would follow up with whoever had applied to say, are you still holding these positions, or can we release them to someone else? And if they're still being held because you haven't found a participant yet, then of course it gets renewed for another 30 days. Students apply. So once an employer has found their participant, students apply with a separate form, a participant information form that gathers the requisite information. That also helps us determine whether or not the student would be part of one of the underrepresented groups. It's the underrepresented groups, of course, I think most of us are familiar now, but just in case we're not, they are first-year students, women in STEM, newcomers to Canada within the last 5 years, students with a disability, or Indigenous students. I don't believe I'm missing any. But those are fundamentally the ones that are deemed underrepresented. And if they are a regular student, just any student in the program, and they're deemed eligible and the placement is eligible, they could be eligible for up to 50% of their salary to $5,000 max. And if they're from the underrepresented group category, it is $70% of salary to $7,000 max. One thing I will come to a little bit later is a bit about the pre-funding for placements, because historically, the way our process has worked has been salary paid, claimed at the end of each month, reimbursed. With some organizations, that's going to change, but I'll talk about that in a second. At the beginning of every placement, we like to see the learning plan. A lot of organizations just copy and paste the learning plan that they're done out of their co-op offices, but recognizing, of course, that we're looking at work integrated learning writ large. As long as the placement corresponds to a student's learning in some way, and we can tie that together with the learning plan, then we look beyond just co-ops. We have a broader look at the work integrated learning. Direct deposit forms are submitted to us because we remit payment by a direct EFT or electronic funds transfer, and contracts are then created, shared with the employer partner, signed, returned to us, and countersigned. Then on a monthly basis, we process the claims and remit via EFT. And we will check in periodically with the student and the employer just to see how things are going. And then at the end of every placement, we have a reflection that relates back to the learning plan. The idea being that in order for learning to have occurred well, our hope would be that we think about what exactly that learning happens to be. So we were trying to follow the best practices wherever possible as we run the program. Professional skills training. So every time EHRC starts up a project, we have a steering committee put together of industry, academic, and union partners to make sure that the project is online or in line with what their expectations of what they want to see coming out of a program of this nature. This particular program is composed of industry and academic representatives, both from the college and university system. And for this particular project, because we are developing a professional skills training program based on fairly comprehensive research of what's currently available in Canada's post-secondary system, we've put together an academic advisory group with representation from faculties across Canada in engineering, technicians, technologists, and co-op offices. And they are providing us oversight and guidance on the development of the professional skills training program from a pedagogy and learning approach perspective. And what we heard from our steering committee before putting this all together was that this needed to be as turnkey as possible, and it needed to be easy for either an academic institution or an employer or a company to implement as possible. So we broke it into 4 phases. So the first is awareness of what professional skills are. Those are a series of videos, 10 videos that we put together that align to the 10 skills that we've identified as core to professional skills development. The second component is a self-directed learning, which will be available online through the EHRC website, or partners who are interested in implementing it for themselves will be able to download or receive a SWRM-compliant learning management system file that they could then upload into their own LMS. There's an in-group or in-class group instruction component. This is basically a series of PDFs that outline a facilitator's responsibilities, but also provide the participant guides to run an in-class session for learning the professional skills. And then lastly, there's a mentoring and coaching component. And the goal for the mentoring and coaching is to provide the resources for the mentor to provide the best guidance they can to a student who's learning professional skills on a one-to-one basis, but it also allows the student, gives them guidance on what questions to ask with a given mentor. And then lastly, as part of the mentoring and coaching component, we are developing an online system to match mentors with mentees. And we expect that this will launch later this year. So all of this, the professional skills training program is expected to launch a pilot phase over the summer, and then a full bore into the fall term. Why is this not going? There we go. A bridge. So one of the components of our program I mentioned at the very beginning is the ability to connect more people together in one place on our website. Historically, EHRC has not had a job board, and so what we are in the process of doing is partnering with the Magnet and Career Connect partners to develop something that employers, educators, and students come together in one place to be part of that ecosystem. So we're in the process of ironing that out now, and it is our expectation that this year we expect to launch the career portal for this. So we're hoping to be the bridge that connects all of the different pieces of the ecosystem together on behalf of the electricity sector. The next piece that is probably of most import to most of you on the call. So program changes for the student work placement program. The first big one, post-secondary education institutions are now eligible. So I've spoken a bit about that already, but basically what this means is fundamentally they can be the employer of record for a student looking for a placement. Small to mid-sized companies and not-for-profit organizations can receive upfront funding. So any organization that doesn't fall into that category we would work with them in the traditional way. So if it's a large employer, a large employer regardless of their status as an institution or organization, we do a reimbursement basis for funding. Anything less than 500 employees or full-time employees, any organization with less than 500 full-time employees and not-for-profits can receive upfront funding, maximum 75% for the first half of the placement. At the halfway mark, we can release the second 25%, but only if the claims have been submitted against that first allotment of funding and are up to date for the first 2 months of funding. So that is a big change as well. Historically, we have only done reimbursement, and so for small to mid-sized companies and not-for-profits, this is a good boost in the arm so that they're able to keep the doors open and keep people employed without having to worry about cash flow. As we mentioned, employers can receive pre-approval. EHRC already had that process in place, so that's not really an issue for us. Remote work integrated learning is possible and allowable. The big reason for this is that a lot of employers are currently working, have their staff or parts of their staff working from home. EHRC is an organization, we represent a sector where, yes, there are employees that work from home, but we also have employees that work in the field as well. So the goal for us has always been to ensure that the students are appropriately supervised. And so most of our employers already have a lot of those processes and procedures in place, particularly as a lot of them have implemented their continuity, business continuity plans. So again, this has not been a huge thing for us, but it is something that was a bit of a change from traditional work integrated learning placements in the past, and particularly the work from home where a supervisor is directly involved on a day-to-day basis. We did have one situation where it was a really interesting one, but we did have to get special approval for it before, where a company in Waterloo actually funded 2 students in the Northwest Territories, supervising them to do work for that company because there was a connection there. But we found that was a worthwhile one to fund, and also sought special approval to make it happen, just given the nature of the relationship that was developed. But that is also something that we could consider in this sort of new environment as well. That wouldn't require special approval. And then the last thing, we have had requests from some employers around start dates where they maybe were planning to start either mid-April or start of May, and they're pushing those dates back, hoping that we may be back to a more normal work environment in June. And really the way we're handling that, we've already been handling this, but really the way we're handling that is just an email to us letting us know which students and what date they would like to change their start date to. We have no real issues with this. The only thing that we have to be cognizant of is that we can't go, the end date can't go beyond March 31st of 2021, because these changes are effective only for this fiscal year of the program. So all of the changes outlined on the page above, effective April 1st, 2020 to March 31st of 2021. One thing to note, of course, is that we have always been doing the employer pre-approval and intend to continue to do that, because that's just best practice, basically, for us. So, how to get involved in the program, anybody who's interested. All of the information that I've talked about today, as well as the details around eligibility for organizations, institutions, students, etc., are available at the website at the top there, the Empowering Futures one, including the eligibility forms and the process forms, whether it's the electronic funds transfer registration or claims or that sort of thing. All of that is available on the EHRC website. We also have links in this slide deck, which will be shared with everyone afterwards. We also have some supporting materials that we've been putting together as a result of the program. So I mentioned the professional skills program. We actually did a comprehensive body of research around that to allow us to guide us to what are the 10 professional skills that we'd like our sector to focus on in newcomers to the sector, whether they be students or new graduates. And so we put together Skill Savvy, which is a report that outlines that research, but also how we settled on the 10 skills and why we're calling them professional skills and not soft skills. So that's a great report, freely available and downloadable from our website. And then, of course, the Empowering the Next Generation Workforce is our, I'm going to call it swan song to do work integrated learning in Canada, and the importance of work integrated learning to students' entrance into the economy on graduation. Also available on our website, of course, is existing employers, those who have already participated in the program, as well as post-secondary education institutions. And all of this is available from that same website and clickable via the link that we'll share with you afterwards. And of course, there's always an opportunity to become a member of EHRC and help guide the future of the organization. So feel free to check that out as well. The last thing that I will leave you with is any questions. So if you do have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box. It looks like a little sort of caricature chat function. I think it's in the upper right of your screen in most cases. And then Alex, I think you were going to read off the initial questions for me.
Yeah, hi Mark. We've been getting some questions coming through and I've been able to answer some of them as they come up, but there's a couple that I wanted to check with you. One of the questions that came up, and I was hoping you might be able to clarify, is are post-secondary education institutions already pre-approved, or does each department have to be pre-approved? My understanding is because this is new for PSEs, each institution will have to go through the approval process. However, it can be done as a single institution in a centralized way or through each department or school. Is this correct?
So that's a good question. Basically, all post-secondary institutions would be pre-approved. However, we are operating on a first come, first served basis. So anybody who wants to secure funding and have that funding guaranteed would need to put in their request for approved funding in advance, so that we reserve that spot for you. We've got 600 placements, and that is a lot. But by introducing it to the post-secondary education ecosystem, they could go quickly. I don't know. This is new. This is all new for everyone. So basically, yes, the institutions would be eligible. That wouldn't be something to be concerned about. The same is true of any employer in the generation, transmission, and distribution space. Typically, the reason somebody submits a pre-approval form would really be to hold a place in our application process, so that we don't, they don't lose a spot, basically.
Great. Next question that we've got. is relating to employers, and you might have some insight into this because of our relationships with them. Our employers are waiting to hire, and this is largely around the pandemic. They're hoping a better funding deal comes out. Do you think that this will happen?
A better funding deal through the SWPP program or generally from other government funding? Was there clarification on
I
that?
think both, but we might have some insight into what we've heard from ESDC so far.
That's a great question. The government, I don't know if any of you follow the Prime Minister's office on a daily basis. I do, just as a product of my work, but they have been announcing new programs and new funding and new criteria for funding almost on a daily basis since COVID really broke out. I can't really speak to other programs, whether it's the SERB or some of these other, like the summer student program, for example, beyond what we all already know. What I can tell you is the parameters of this program remain the same for now. There has been a push to try and modify some additional parameters in this program. So for example, the net new clause, but that clause stands for now. And the biggest reason for that is it was part of the Treasury Board submission and Privy Council's approval and PMO's approval, et cetera. So I don't know. The short answer to the question is I don't know if the parameters of this program are going to change. If they do, though, one of the first questions that most partners are going to have is, are those changes going to be retroactive? So if somebody applied, was approved for funding of 50% to $5,000 and this is purely a hypothetical, by the way, and if they were approved for 50% to $5,000 and the government then came back and said, okay, now everybody's approved for 100% to $5,000 or 100% to $10,000, would that be retroactive? And the short answer to that question is, again, I don't know, but that would be my first question back to the funder in the event that was to change. So right now, the parameters are 50% to $5,000 for regular students, 70% to $7,000 for students from underrepresented groups. Trades are ineligible, and students have to be legally entitled to work in Canada.
Perfect. And I think it's worth saying that one of the benefits that we play as a SWPP delivery partner is passing on feedback to the federal government from either educators, students, employers to make sure that the program is being as beneficial as possible.
Yeah.
One of the next questions is the employer eligibility assessment on your site the same as pre-approval?
Yeah, it's the same form. So we've tried to make it as simple as possible. So for the first time that form is filled in for a post-secondary institution, for example, they've got to go through the full thing. When they get to the part that says, do you have a participant already? If they do, go ahead, fill it in. But if they don't and they want the pre-approval for funding, fill in the questions associated with that and we'll hold the spots. Then though, when they come back, when they have more like an actual participant, they can skip a lot of the questions pertaining that they've already filled in. Like it's the same form, it's just streamlined to accept that basically.
Okay, great. One of the questions that we've had asked in a couple different ways is around how we're able to provide this as a SWPP delivery partner. Previously, it was exclusively for the electricity sector, but now for PSEs, is it more open for their placements outside of traditional electricity sector?
We're still looking for some sort of a tie to the electricity sector, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be somebody in electrical engineering, for example. We're really trying to encourage organizations to think outside of the box when it comes to electricity. So a good example, I had a call the other day with someone asking about an accelerator that they have inside of their organization, and they've got five participants in the accelerator essentially that are each, they each have their own little company startup. And each of those startups, while they're not doing core generation, transmission, or distribution, are part of the ecosystem that ultimately participates in the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity, whether it's software development or, I don't know, consultative services or something like that. So yes, the tie, but the tie doesn't have to be direct. It can be tenuous. If you have a business student, for example, working on some sort of a change to grid management, for example, or doing research on electricity markets, for example, and how they're done in Europe versus in Ontario, or Ontario versus Quebec even, that would totally be eligible.
And I think it's also worth mentioning that as we're opening this up to PSEs through these flexibility measures, we're still working very hard to ensure that students are getting relevant field placement and work integrated learning opportunities within the sector so that upon graduation, they're able to transition into their employment.
Yeah, that's the fundamental goal, right? We want to make sure that, so one of the things that we did in our research was we found that on graduation, a lot of employers saying that students were graduating without the requisite professional skills, and feel free to have a look at the white paper to see what those are, but there was an overwhelming majority of employers that felt that this was the case. And actually a number of post-secondary institutions and even students themselves, because we did go to all parties when we asked the questions. And so it's important to us as a component of the work integrated learning placement that professional skills are developed in some way. So it would be our goal that at the end of a placement, those professional skills have been developed at least somewhat as a component of the program. The one thing that we've consistently heard about Canada's education system is that we, as a country, graduate world-class, technically skilled graduates. They are by far some of the best in the world. Where we need to do a little more work is on the professional skills specifically.
Perfect. Well, we don't have any more other questions coming in, but Mark and I are both available for follow-up. We'll be posting this online, both the presentation and the webinar itself, hosted on our website, and that will be emailed to all of the participants that have registered today.
Thank you all so much for being here today. I know it's busy, especially a lot of us working from home and with kids and that sort of thing, juggling a lot of balls, but I really appreciate you being on the call today. And as Alex said, feel free to reach out. My email is on the screen in front of you. And we are more than happy to entertain other questions. And of course, this will be posted online afterwards. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a great day.